Welcome into Walker Talks Radio on a Sunday morning. I don't know if I've ever recorded an episode on a Sunday morning, and if you're listening live or joining us live, thank you for doing that on a relaxing, hopefully for you, Sunday morning, early August. Not as hot as it's been in West Tennessee because it's been brutal for the last couple weeks. I'm really excited about my guest today. She is someone that I have known more honestly through social media up until the last year, where I do feel like we've had really productive conversations on a previous radio show I've had, and through some messages as we try to grasp the world in which we're living in West Tennessee and beyond on a political spectrum. It's a wild time in Tennessee. It's been a wild time in Tennessee for a while, and it's a wild time politically in America. Probably, at least for me, I've said to people, the wildest time I can remember in my lifetime. Born in 1979. I know things were pretty crazy before that, but in my lifetime, this is as wild as it's been. My guest today is Dr. Mayo. Liz is the president for Madison Area Democratic Women and a longtime advocate for progressive causes. She has taught college writing and literature for 20 years, is an academic who publishes in the fields of ecofeminism, Southern literary criticism, and academic culture. She's a mother, a wife, and a lifelong native of West Tennessee. Her organization, the Madison Area Democratic Women, is a Jackson, Tennessee-based political action group that welcomes all individuals who identify as women, and they believe that empowering women strengthens the entire community. Their core values include access to health care and reproductive rights, opportunity through jobs and education, political strength through voting in support of candidates, intersectional feminism, womanism, and civil rights for all, prevention of and intervention in violence against women, support of families, elderly and children, and access to and dissemination of evidence-based information. And if you're hearing that and you can find a way to poke a hole in any of that, please do so, because that sounds incredibly logical and makes so much sense to me. But where I want to start, Liz, is I noticed in the bio, you are a lifelong West Tennessean, just as I am. People ask me and have asked me for a while, how did you, as someone who grew up in a very religious and conservative area of the country, end up with a progressive line of thinking? And I would have my answer, but I'm curious to hear yours. So I'm going to throw this to you and ask you the same thing that's been asked to me so many times. How, as
Thank you,
someone
Gabe.
growing up in West Tennessee, did you land in this space?
Well, first of all, I want to thank you because that was a great introduction to my organization. And we do like to think that we have very logical ideals and principles. But no, yeah, that's right. I'm a native West Tennessean. And it's funny because people often ask me where I'm from. And I'm from here. I was born in Milan, Tennessee, Milan Hospital. And I was raised in Milan. And say for just 2 years of living in Middle Tennessee, I've lived in West Tennessee my whole life. So this is the place that raised me. It's just as much a part of my identity as anybody's. And I would say that a lot of my progressive values really started at the Mildred G. Fields Library in Milan, Tennessee. Thank you to public libraries, which give us access to a wealth of knowledge and new ideas. And I think that I was just very inspired by the idea that you could go in and for free check out anything that you wanted and learn about the way that other people live and learn about worlds that don't look like the world that you're used to. I didn't travel a ton growing up. You know, we might go down to the coast in Florida or we might go to St. Louis, but I didn't get the opportunity to see the world. So I spent a lot of time studying the globe. That was really important to me. I've always had maps around me my whole life. And another, I think, surprising place where some of my progressive values really came from, I would say, grew up in the Southern Baptist Church. I do not associate with the Southern Baptist Church at this point, but I will say that I really did appreciate the idea of what it meant to actually live your life like Jesus and to have those kind of values, to do outreach, to do activist work, to stand up for those who needed a little bit more help and couldn't do it by themselves. So I think that's kind of a combination of how I'd respond to that and my short answer.
I think we have a lot of similarities in that. I too grew up in a Southern Baptist church. I don't know that I came to the realization of sort of modeling my belief system, my post-church belief system after the way Jesus lived his life until I was an adult. And I think my last days involved in the church, I just carried those things that I respected, appreciated, and informed my worldview with me as I left. And I'll be honest, I think it served me pretty well looking at the world like that. It can be frustrating at times, especially where we live. I want to ask you this. Do you remember, are there some books that you read as a child that you can point to even now as someone um, who's middle-aged, and you say, "Oh, that book really opened up my eyes to a world outside of me"?
Yeah, first of all, thank you for calling me out for being middle-aged, Gabe. I appreciate that.
I was gonna name
No,
the like say the exact age. I was like, I'll hold off on that.
that's okay. I'm proud of my age. No, there are a couple of books that I think were really foundational for me, and I didn't know you were going to ask this question, but it's a fun question for me. I really, really loved reading this book called The Girl Who Owned a City. Not a lot of people have heard of it. It's dystopian literature. I love dystopia because it opens up a space for us to think about, different alternatives and visions to what, the world might look like through what lens and what could be better or worse than what we're living now, and also make some sometimes eerie and scary connections. And in that book, there's a 10-year-old girl named Lisa who is in a world where there's some sort of weird pandemic that's happening and people are dying. And she's found that anybody over the age of 13 is dying. And so you've got to find a new way to exist without adults around you. And what I loved about this book is this girl found a way to feed people. And I mean, if we're going to use the image of Jesus, I mean, she found a way to feed the masses in what was a time of crisis. And that was very inspiring to me. And that book gave me that image without imposing any particular dogma. It didn't at the time seem very political. Of course, through my middle-aged lens, it might if I were to read it again. So, that's just one of the ones that kind of automatically comes to mind. I could keep on and on and on, but I do love that particular perspective. And then as I got older, I had the ability to read a lot of non-European based books. Things Fall Apart comes to mind. That's a really great kind of foundational book, Etchebe. So yeah, I think that books are life changers, and I think the moment we stop reading is the moment that we lose our soul and our humanity and our empathy as a nation. But I would say that as an English professor.
Well, okay, and that was going to be my
Mm-hmm,
next thing,
mm-hmm,
and I was going to ask you if you think I'm being too simplistic when I say something like this. But I believe, well, there are two things I believe. I believe that our culture, as we're living in it now, and the way that we relate to each other and don't understand each other, has a lot to do with a lack of reading. I don't think
yeah,
people read nearly as often or as much
yeah.
or read nearly as complex text as they used to, and that has caused us to not be able to understand different point of views. For one, the second thing, and I want your opinion on this, and this is sort of off the cuff again. I believe that if more people would start reading, like, and I mean fiction, I don't mean just informational text, I mean specifically fiction. If more people would start reading more complex fictional texts, then I think a lot of this like bitter battles that we see playing out go away. Am I being too
Mm-hmm.
idealistic, or
No, no. I mean, you're talking to someone who, again, studied English for a decade in college. That's very idealistic, but I think that more broadly than reading, we just need the humanities. And when I get ready to transition this into a political conversation with you, I'll say that that's really a lot of what structures my political viewpoint and the way that I vote. There's one party that votes to protect the humanities, and there's another vote that seems to strip that away. And so when we're looking at organizations like the National Endowment for the Arts, National Endowment for the Humanities, I think those are really important. And I think that unfortunately, as Americans as a whole, we think of the arts and the humanities as superfluous. Like we just don't need it. Like, okay, we need food and we need air, but what do we need art for? And honestly, I don't want to live in a world without art. And that, of course, includes beautiful works of fiction, poetry. Yes, we still need poetry. Poetry's not dead, and I think that people can understand that when they think about maybe the poetic parts of, just to kind of think about our local ethos. They like the poetic parts of the Bible. They love to read that, and it speaks to their soul. Well, there's so much more poetry out there that we could be reading and we could be sharing together. And that would help us to have that shared perspective and to envision better worlds and better spaces. I want people to vote after they've been reading a whole lot of poetry and a whole lot of good fiction and looking at good art and listening to beautiful music and enjoying live dance and live performance, because I think that that really is what connects us.
yeah, I completely agree, and I think even as someone who has been in the public education system as an instructor and now as quasi administrative role, I believe that our public education system, not specifically in Jackson, but just in Tennessee in general, I think we are shifting away from that type of reading. And we are starting from a point of we just want an answer. We want to analyze text before we love text. And I think that's a kind of a dangerous road to go down when you're always looking for an answer before you start reading. I think for me, when I read fiction, a lot of it is sort of like unwrapping a present or unrolling a blanket, right? You learn these things as the plot moves or as characters experience different things, much like in life. Like nobody has life figured out from the beginning. It just sort of unrolls and you make decisions with the best information you have. And I think that's where empathy is born too. We could talk about this the
Yeah,
whole time, but I want to make this right.
absolutely. We should have made this episode about the humanities.
We can have another one. We can do it again
Okay.
because there's a
Yeah.
lot to talk about. You are part of a group known as MADWomen, and I referenced it in your bio, Madison Area Democratic Women. Can you talk a little bit about the impetus for starting that group, your role in it, and how you all are able to serve the community around you?
Sure. Yeah. So we are under the umbrella of the Tennessee Federation of Democratic Women. And there was another Democratic women's group in Jackson at one point. MADWomen started a group. A lot of us were members of Madison County Democratic Party, MCDP. And we just felt the need to have a very progressive arm of the Democratic Party because the Democratic Party locally did not feel as progressive as some of us sort of identified. We love to work with that group. That's a fantastic group of people. But it's also really nice to have a space for women by women and women supporting women. So we organized, if I can remember correctly, I believe it was 2017 that we started. And I have been a member since the beginning. I've served in the capacity of secretary a few times, and I just became our president this last year. And so in that role, I think all presidents kind of have a different way of running the club. Debbie Swacker, she's our former longtime president. She's a fantastic advocate for MADWomen, tirelessly works for our organization. For me, what I can give to the organization, I like to write, I like to communicate. And I think that just as a group, we are a bunch of professional and capable women who would love to see greater voter turnout. If we did nothing else, we would love to see some voter engagement. That's one of the number one issues. In fact, I'd been spouting a statistic I heard maybe a year ago that Tennessee was number 47 for voter engagement. That's not actually true. We're number 51 according to the Tennessean. One, and that is based on a report from MIT that they did this year. So everybody in the United States turns out to vote more than Tennesseans, and I have a problem with that.
I want to ask you and you may not know, if you don't know the context around that 51st ranking, that's okay. I have some ideas why I think it is. I want to hear why you think it is. Was there a context
Yeah.
around that stat?
I think if you delve a little bit deeper, there is. But what they found is there tends to be a less voter engagement among rural communities, which I find interesting because we're no more rural than some other places. I mean, when you look at like sheer land mass per capita per person in other places like Wyoming, for example, why aren't they lower in voter turnout than we are? Of course, they have fewer people than we have. Someone who's better at numbers than I am could certainly answer that. But, what I would gather and what I've seen is that we've done a really great job of just making voters feel disenfranchised. I think the supermajority in Tennessee stands, and it stands strong. It seems like it's never going to topple. And so I hear people all the time, even smart people who I respect, say, what's the point? My vote's just going to be symbolic anyway. And I would argue, yeah, your vote's going to continue to be symbolic if you keep not voting. And, I don't actually believe, I know that we are a red state, but I don't believe that at heart we are a red state. I think that, poor educational returns are connected to how we vote. And so I think that we're telling people one thing and they're not realizing that that reality doesn't actually match what they're voting for. And this is why we need more readers. Thank you, Gabe, for helping to educate our K through 12 masses. I appreciate that. Because when you have readers, you have people who take a look at the text and they're like, wait a second. Okay, you're telling me that you care about me and you care about my health, but you're not expanding Medicaid. So if you're not expanding Medicaid, why is a vote for you helping my health? But then people will still vote that way because they believe what they've been told.
Yeah,
Without questioning it.
No, yes, I completely agree with that as well. I think you hit the nail on the head too with the supermajority. For 14 years straight, Tennessee has had a trifecta supermajority: House, Senate, governor. That's a long time. And along with that power, districts have been gerrymandered, admittedly, like that side said that. And so you have this boot on a neck is what it is. The image that keeps coming to my head of Tennessee government on citizens and voters. And you're right. They're just like, what's the point? My philosophy, and I would like to hear what you think about this. I wrote a column for Tennessee Lookout a couple weeks ago, maybe a month ago, called Political Habituation, where we've allowed this supermajority to move further and further to the right. Almost like this silly analogy I heard when I was in church about a frog boiling a frog in hot water, right? You put it in tepid
Yeah,
water
slowly. Mm-hmm.
slowly, and now all of a
Mm-hmm.
sudden we wake up and oh my God, we've got a trigger ban. We were doing nothing about guns, and we're like, how did we get here? And even Republicans are like, wait, I don't think this is not what I intended. So my thought
Mm-hmm.
is these primary elections are where you start to move that supermajority back to the middle, and then you start working across the aisle more, and then maybe we start getting more Democrats in. Do you think that, or is that like, or are you of the mindset we just got to elect more Democrats?
No, I mean, obviously, I want to elect more Democrats,
Right.
but I want to elect more Democrats because I want a more balanced state. I mean, it's the reason that I want a more balanced Supreme Court. I do believe in having balanced voices. And this is not, I'm sure, anybody viewing this will be like, oh, yeah, of course, this woman is the president for Madison area Democratic Women, but I want to see some balance, and we do not have balance right now. And what people need to understand is when you don't have political balance, you don't have a true democracy and you don't have true representation of voices. And so I think you mentioned the primaries. Yeah, that's people don't understand the difference. I think they get very excited about presidential elections, and they're like, oh, yes, I'm going to go vote for president, but when we get to like the primary elections, like let's look at, August the 1st, how many people turned out for that? And the Tennesseans reporting the same thing, like voter turnout just dropped. And so people do not understand the importance of local politics and how local politics affect your everyday existence and how state politics are important. So all we care about is going, to vote for the Trumps or the Harris or whomever's running, but we don't think about the things that are more immediate needs.
Yeah, absolutely. And those, you're right. Local politics have such a greater impact on us. I believe, obviously, 2 years ago when Roe versus Wade got overturned,
Mm-hmm.
Tennesseans, Tennessee women were affected more than anyone else in the country because of a
Yes.
decision made on the state level that kind of flew under the radar for most people. If I had to guess, they
Mm-hmm.
probably had no idea whenever that was in 2017 or 18, whenever they passed that. Hey, just in
Yes.
case Roe ever gets overturned, we've got this waiting. And when it hit, that's when I think a lot of people's eyes on the right side of the aisle too, especially women, were like, "Whoa, wait, what? This is insane."
Listen, I want to say we had members of MADWomen when they were talking about the heartbeat bill. They drove to the Capitol and they were talking to those lawmakers. I mean, these are women, Gabe, I admire and respect. They are in their 70s and they went to the Capitol and said, we've already been here. We know how this story ends. We've seen the end of this film. Please don't do this. It will be dangerous for women. Women will die. It's not pro life. And they didn't listen. And when Dobbs' decision came down in June 2022, and then a few weeks thereafter, we found ourselves effectively not having any access to abortion care. I will tell you that the numbers are very clear. Most Tennesseans were not in support of having such draconian laws, and the lawmakers did not care. They didn't care. And so, what I've found in having these conversations with young people and trying to explain it to them is that they have been so disenfranchised by their lack of political science and government and civics education in their K through 12 schools that they don't even know how to vote. They don't know what the Supreme Court is. They don't know what any of this means. And I have to explain to them this is a big deal. This is not something that we just go back and we fix overnight. And they look at me and they say, is this it? So this is it. This is how we're going to live now. And I'm like, yes, this decision has been made and it's been made at the Supreme Court level. That's a huge, huge thing that will affect you and your children.
If people were to lay out what, even when I say the word abortion, even in my mind, there's a connotation to that where it's almost
100%.
right where it's like, oh, like even I feel myself tense up a little bit, either waiting for the blowback from the other side, or as soon as that word comes out of my mouth, the other side shuts down. So I like women's health care because that's truly what it is. So what do people get wrong most about this topic, do you think? How has it been spun so wrongly that people think it's simply about a life and death issue?
I think that you just nailed it, which is just the negative connotation that the term attaches. I want you to note that I explicitly, intentionally use the terminology abortion care because I do believe that it is a form of health care and it is a procedure. And I think that, there are many times where women, they tried to have a baby, they were pregnant with that baby, they wanted that baby, and the most heartbreaking thing has occurred to them, which is that baby is not viable, and they then have to get an abortion. Sometimes we're looking at women who already have 2 and 3 children. They might be in an abusive relationship. It is dangerous for them to move forward with a pregnancy. I think that there are a lot of different situations that need to be considered, but ultimately, I don't think it is the right of the state, particularly non-medical voices, to make medical decisions about individual women's lives. I find it deeply hypocritical, particularly coming from the, small government party with the Republicans. I think it's the opposite of small government party. And I just worry how much further this is going to be taken. We've been having these wild conversations about IVF, birth control pill, the morning after pill. I mean, what is it that we are trying to do here, Gabe? And it's very clear that it's a direct and explicit attack on women. I mean, you and I both have something in common. We're raising daughters. And I'm not going to be silent as a woman in the state of Tennessee while raising daughters about the fact that this particular healthcare procedure is important and necessary, and it saves lives.
It's interesting because there have been laws or bills floated, and I should know, I don't know if they've passed or not, floated about aiding and abetting someone who needs to get across state
Yes.
lines to have a
Yes.
procedure done. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, these things, like, you're right. I mean, just in and of itself, the Dobbs decision was overreach in Tennessee because of the sugar ban. But now you're going to prosecute people who are just trying to help someone have a medical procedure. Like, yeah, you're right. How far
Yeah.
does this go? And we talked a little bit about religion. How much of this do you think is grounded in I'll say it, a misinterpretation of religious thoughts by
Yeah,
legislators?
I think deeply so. And I think, one of the things I want to note is just, again, how politicized the church has become, and how politicized it is in the state of Tennessee. And we can just speak to that, but in America in general, at one point, the Republican Party had no problem with abortion. I mean, it was perfectly fine. It was really just more so late 60s and the 70s when they started to see that trending away from being able to use racism as a policy, where they started to think, okay, now we need something that's going to bring in voters. What can we do? And this is where they land on this, conservative viewpoint that now, abortion is problematic. Whereas previously we had clergy who were promoting abortion. That's the difference that we have. If anybody's interested in this topic, there's a great documentary about it. It's called Reversing Roe. I believe it's still streaming on Netflix. And so this is a transition slowly to where we see this becomes like kind of the top party platform, so that people are not worried about voting for anything else that has to do with a high standard of living, affordable health care, safe housing, good jobs, that, have benefits. No, instead, we're just going to focus on abortion care is the one thing that we're going to vote on, and that's going to be it. And that is definitely linked up to the church. And I think it's spoken in pulpits. And I think the big thing is that we have to be careful it's not an attack on someone's individual beliefs pattern. I think that that's really important to protect that as well. But when you politicize the pulpit, you're taking what is a non-tax paying entity, and you're doing something, I think, that is a waste of public funding.
Absolutely. And the irony of Tennessee is people will label themselves pro-life, but we consistently, as a state, rank in the bottom 10 in the country in child well-being, in maternal care, education. All of these
Yeah,
things that affect children and how they grow up, we seem to want to ignore. As long as we can just make sure they're born, then we just take our hands off. Well, when I
right.
say we, I mean the state legislators who are drafting these bills and passing these
Sure.
bills. And the irony of calling yourself pro-life, but then when the living actually happens, you take your hands off and say, "Good luck. I hope you have some bootstraps you can pull." So
Yeah.
there's just a lot of, and I think some of the conversation we were having before we started recording comes back to that. Rather than just looking at a political platform, we stopped looking at people as humans, and we've looked at them as issues or narratives that, and I keep saying that politicians on the right can throw out there like chum for sharks, and they're highly emotional. They are, the issues are. They are communicated in a way that includes a lot of mis and disinformation, both purposefully.
Mm-hmm.
And it goes back to what you said about the lack of readers. They don't have either the time, or I don't know if the skill is the right word, or care to even dive into these issues and see what's real or not. How
Mm-hmm.
are the Mad Women group, or are you all doing things or pushing for things at the state level, or is this more of a Madison County thing?
I think we've done a little bit of both. I will say, I want to back up to one of your points though before I move to that, which is that you were talking about, just leaving individuals just to kind of like pull themselves up by their bootstraps. And I did talk about this in my article a few months ago in the Jackson Post, which is that Tennessee is one of the bottom for using our TANF funds, which are those funds to help needy families. And so we've got all this money that we've just like thrown into a pot, and we're like, you know what, we're not going to touch this. We're going to save this for a rainy day, even though the rainy day is now, and we know that people are struggling. So I just want to put that out there. That always bothers me when I think about things that we're doing at the state level that we could do that would actually be pro-life, is to distribute those TANF funds. But as far as the group goes, we've had members who have, again, I told you about some going up to the Capitol. I've been up to the Capitol myself. We've been there with the organization Moms Demand Action, trying to advocate for sensible gun ownership. We know how important guns are to Tennesseans and Americans in general. And so we're just asking for some sensible checks and balances to make sure that we're keeping people safe. Again, another very pro-life thing to do. Locally, we have been doing some outreach work. You mentioned All Saints, the Anglican Church. We've talked to them about their immigration services that they do. We've had that conversation. We have collected items to help homeless women within our local community. But one thing that we've got coming up in another week, Debbie Swacker and I, the current treasurer, former president, and my dear friend, we're actually going to attend a meeting of the Keep My Hood Good group and go talk to a group of moms who are interested in voting. And we're going to get them registered to vote. And we're just going to bring the QR code, get them signed up, talk to them about these very things that we're talking about today. What's a primary election? Why do you want to vote early? Why do you vote? And if I did nothing else, I would want my legacy as president is to really just show that we spent a lot of time trying to get people engaged and feeling like they had a reason to be engaged in voting in the state of Tennessee.
Yeah, and that is incredibly important. Is just to register people to vote. I think with
Yeah.
the way things are culturally, a lot of people I know are working more than one job. I do know that.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, Obviously, with phones, computers, social media, all of that, our attention span isn't as long as it was. I don't feel like collectively as a society, and I think voting is one of those things that just people don't pay a lot of attention to. I also think
Yeah.
the way that we communicate about politics burns people out. And last time you and I were on a radio show together, like I was at a point where I was like, I don't know if I even want to keep doing this, and I will
I know.
cycle on it. I kind of felt reinvigorated spring and summer. And then in the last 2 weeks, man, with all of the stuff I've seen on social media with the Olympics, I'm like, I just want to like move and build a cabin in the woods somewhere and throw away all my phones and all my computers and just
Mm-hmm.
like live.
I know.
It's so hard to even engage. But I think what you said, when you sit down with people face to face, that's
Mm-hmm.
where a lot of this can turn, I think, or at least start to turn.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah. Well, and because you mentioned, like let's just take out this like hot topic and let's throw that out and get people really upset about it. That is a classic red herring. And so I think that education matters. If we're giving students a good public education, and then they go on to a community college or a 4 year and they're learning more about a logical fallacy, then they can recognize when these things happen, because that's what that red herring is. It's a logical fallacy meant to knock them off their game. Pay attention to this thing over here so you don't see that I'm stripping all your whites away. Number one thing we have to do is educate people. So, I feel like all of this is just connected. We keep talking about reading, we keep talking about the humanities, and then we keep coming back to politics, but they're not actually separate topics. I think a fully functioning, beautiful United States of America would be one where everybody has access to a really solid public education. And then after that, a solid liberal arts program or some kind of training program. Also, I'm of the mindset that even, training workforce programs should have some kind of humanities component to it. I want my mechanic to have a sense of humanity. I want everybody who serves in this country to have some sense of shared empathy for one another. And I think that's how we improve our voter turnout and also our voter outcomes.
I want to go back and ask you about a specific piece of legislation that didn't make it out of committee in this past session. And it was based around eliminating the grocery tax in Tennessee. Were you aware of that, following it?
Did you write about this, Gabe?
I may have mentioned it in something.
Yeah.
And there's a state rep, Afton Bain, and I may mispronounce
Afton, yeah.
it. Okay,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah, yeah.
and
Hmm.
she was pushing for this, and
Hmm.
she also partnered with a Republican on a bipartisan bill that did get through, and I remember that because like, oh man, that rarely happens, and and this is a big deal,
Yeah.
and it didn't get as much press as it should have because that's, in my opinion, the way a healthy democracy works. That being said, she is pushing for a repeal of the grocery tax, and that is something. And I believe, and I understand how much tax dollars impact the state, right? I get it. But
Yeah, sure.
there's
Yeah.
different ways to pull that money. When I think about the grocery tax on necessities such as food, and everybody's paying the same amount, to me that doesn't seem fair or equitable at all. Now, have you, and
Hmm.
I didn't know if you had followed that bill or anything like that or the push for that, but what are your thoughts on
Right.
eliminating a grocery tax?
I probably followed it like as closely as your typical person, but I would say that I just got back from a very long road trip with my family, and we went to 15 states all around New England and many different places that are just beautiful in our great country. And more than once, my husband and I remarked on like how cheap our bill was, and we realized often it was like our food bill was cheap because we didn't have the tax on it that we have back home. And I do believe that we need to, pay our part and share in that weight together. But the fact is, people are struggling, and Tennessee has a lot of people who are well below the poverty line. Food is a basic necessity. If we want to talk about, that religious ethos again and feeding the masses, this seems like a really easy way to make one's personal religious ethos, match your policy.
It's funny. I spent a lot of time in Pennsylvania. My girlfriend lives outside of Philadelphia. They
Mm-hmm.
have no sales tax on necessities, food, clothing, even. But they have a state income tax, right? That being said, it's based on the amount of money you make. That's a percentage. I would be
Yes.
completely okay. Like everybody's so anti state income tax and blah, blah, blah. If you got to make up what you're going to lose from a grocery tax, I'm fine with something that's based on your income paying it. And those are the things
Sounds like socialism,
that
Gabe.
that's what I was going to say because that's the word the other side would throw out.
Mm-hmm.
They don't even understand what socialism
It's a
is.
dirty word. Yeah.
So yes, but that's a whole
Yeah.
other trail of thought we could go down. I want to shift a little bit, and I think I have agreed with 100% of everything you have said so far.
So let's disagree on something.
This is where we might disagree. I want to shift it to the national stage of the Democratic Party. I've voted Democrat in every presidential election since 2004. In 2000, I voted for George Bush because I went to Union. I didn't know any better. I didn't follow. That's it.
Oh,
That
my
is
apologies.
yes. That is literally why I did that. But from 2004 until 2020, I voted for the Democratic candidate. I don't know that I've ever called myself a Democrat. I've had many people call me that for me. It's fine. I don't like to own certain things because that the party could change. I could change. Like I'm just very know where I land. My principles align much more with the Democratic platform by far than they do the other one or anywhere in the middle. That being said, I have struggled a little bit with the way the DNC has handled some of the candidates 16 on. I don't think they were open to voices of the majority of their constituents. And I know there were primaries and things like that, but it seems like every time we were ready, and I'm going to say we, after I just said I don't consider myself a Democrat, we were ready to nominate somebody, was like fully getting ready to get behind, we go with the safe play. And then
Hmm.
it brings us to where we are right now, which was, I think, 2 weeks ago, President Biden said he was, and they inserted Vice President Harris in that spot without opening up the vote to Democratic citizens, right? For us to have a say in who we think this candidate should be. Now, I read your column in the
Hmm.
Post, and you guys were wholeheartedly endorsing Vice President Harris. How did you feel about the process? Because I love the candidate, I don't love the process.
Sure. No, I get that. And I've been thinking a lot about that. And I want to take back because you mentioned you'd not been happy since like roughly 2016. And I remember those primaries very clearly. I was full disclosure, and I'm very proud to say, an Elizabeth Warren fan. I loved Elizabeth Warren. I think she's incredibly intelligent. She's got a lot of just kind of key background knowledge of government. But I digress. And I liked Kamala. And so, I was not super thrilled that Biden was the nominee then. And I did feel like, but I'm sorry, not 2016, 2020. I was not super thrilled with how that happened. I will tell you that it was the safe choice, but I think that we needed to be safe coming off of 2016, seeing what happened with Clinton and Trump. Obviously, it worked out, I think, in our favor because I did not want to see another Trump presidency, nor do I want to see that ever again. So fast forward to today. I was like you. I respect President Biden. I think he is a good American. I did not think he was the right choice for the nomination. And I very much felt like we were looking at an inevitable Trump presidency. And it was hard for me, as someone who the president of the MADWomen, we want to support our party, and I was going to do everything that I could to help get Democratic candidates elected. But when I heard that he endorsed Kamala and she quickly became the presumptive nominee, my thought was, but of course. I mean, she's intelligent. She's already been vetted. It's a very long process to vet somebody who can be a candidate for presidency. Should the Democrats have started this process sooner? Should they have made President Biden step down sooner? Absolutely. That frustrates me. It frustrates me deeply. They didn't, and I can't change that history. I will tell you, I felt like it was one of the most American things that Biden could have done when he stepped aside. I don't want voters to feel disenfranchised. I will say we've already voted on a Biden-Harris ticket. So in many ways, she's been vetted by Americans. We've had the option to kind of think about what she would look like because the fact is the role of VP, presumptive president if something happens. And we did have a president with advanced age. So it's for all of those reasons that I think this and also, our super delegates at the convention, those are elected officials. We've already elected them. They are the voices. So they go forward and they decide who's going to be the nominee. So we've already had a say in that way. No other viable Democratic candidate was going to step up and say, you know what, I'm going to take on Kamala Harris. It just doesn't make any sense. And yet, when asked this question by a reporter for the Jackson Sun, she's like, is the Democratic Party in chaos right now? I said, absolutely not. I feel like we are more aligned with one another than we've ever been before. And I was incredibly proud of Tennessee. Hendra Remus is the chair of the TNDP, and he was on MSNBC almost immediately. And we were the first ones to say, you know what, we are going to pledge our delicate support to Harris. And that was a really fantastic moment to me that just showed you, at least at the state level, the Democratic Party is perfectly unified at this moment.
Here's where, and it wasn't just this particular situation. I know in a lot of states, the Democratic Party wouldn't let Dean Phillips on the ballot primary, or Kennedy had to go independent because that's whatever.
We're not going to defend Kennedy, Mr.
No.
Anti-Science. I mean, his own family doesn't want him to run, so we're not. I mean. I don't understand that one.
Here's where, as somebody who has pushed for fully open primaries and voices of voters, and is a plaintiff on a lawsuit right now against the district attorneys across the state for voter intimidation, something that's very important to me is allowing citizens to have a voice. Now,
I feel that, yeah.
And I think that even with the Phillips not getting on a lot of the primaries in certain states, Kennedy doing what he does, Biden did have just an easy walk-in to this nomination. And I know it's rare for an incumbent to have that overturned, but still it felt like and for me too, since 2016, with whatever happened with Bernie and Hillary, which I'm not complaining about Hillary being the nominee. I'm complaining about the process of what the DNC has done on a national level that doesn't totally sit right with me. It didn't change the way I voted in any of those situations.
Do you think Bernie should have been the nominee in 2016?
I don't know. I don't know that I think he should have been. I think there were a lot of people who were under that Democratic umbrella who wanted him to be. And I think that the National Party did not want him to be. Now, that being said, personally, I liked him. Did I think he was a candidate that could win? Probably not. And that's sort of where I landed with Biden at the end of this. Mm-hmm. I liked his policies. I don't like the way he presented. He couldn't argue those policies well. He couldn't articulate the benefits of them well. And I think that's a huge job of a president. I think presentation is a huge job of a president.
How do you think that compares to Donald Trump?
No. That's the thing. I expect more from us, and that's where I land. I
You
don't
just
want.
said us, by the way.
I
So I just
know,
want to
I
note
know,
that you said.
and that's I made a
Sounds
Facebook.
like you're a Democrat. I'm just letting
Yeah,
you know.
like I expect more from the Democratic Party than I do the
Hmm.
Republican Party. Like that's what separates the way I think about things and why I align so much more at the left than the right. And I don't want that comparison. And that's what we were getting. And that's why I don't want to be like that. And I think sometimes the process being done for us feels like something from the other side that I don't like. And again, logistically, I don't know how that would have worked. But I think not
Hmm.
even having a public discussion about it, if they would have publicly said, listen, we're trying to figure out everything we can. Logistically, we don't know if there's enough time, but we're talking about it. And then nominate Harris. I might be okay with
But I mean, let's be honest. I think that a lot of Democrats think that truly democracy is at stake. And I do not like hyperbole. I don't like conspiracy theory. I like to think of myself as a rational person who looks at the science and the evidence. The science and the evidence is there. We're looking at many different ways in which our rights have already been stripped away. So, in some ways, keeping that information and holding it back until after the Republican National Convention happened, I think was really important because if you're looking at it strategically and this is a war play, okay, go ahead and show your hand. And then we're going to come in behind you and have a sneak attack that you were not expecting. And that may seem dirty, but honestly, I'll be the first one to say the Democratic Party has not played dirty enough. And it is time. Do I think that that disenfranchised voters? No. I think that there's a small percentage of people who say, hey, I would have liked an opportunity to weigh in. Sadly, we don't see a lot of people voting in those primaries in the first place. And for the people who did vote and they voted for Biden, again, they were voting for a Biden Harris ticket already. So they got a vetted candidate who already has experience as vice president, experience as attorney general, experience as a senator. And they've got, again, their elected delegates, super delegates, who are already there and they're putting the stamp of approval on her nomination. So there are checks and balances there. But more broadly, do I wish America had more than two viable parties? Yes, I do. I wish that we did, but we don't. And so realistically, this is what we have to work with. And so that just gets off into a whole other thing of talking about third party candidates and what that looks like. And that's another episode.
I'm going to say this. My issue, my anger, and I had anger towards President Biden. Not that he knows who I am or even that I even exist on this, right? So it
Were
doesn't
you
matter.
angry because he didn't step down sooner,
Yes.
or were you angry because, okay,
I
all
was
right.
angry because it was clear, first of all, he wasn't going to win this. In my mind, I thought it was going to be a
Yeah,
runaway. And
yeah,
he had every reason, and people would have applauded him if he just would have stepped away. Like immediately after that debate. Or honestly, even before people around him, because I don't think that was a one-off. I mean, he presents much differently now than he did 2 years ago. He just does. And I believe my biggest issue with him is you're going to lose this for us, right?
mm-hmm.
I don't have any problem with you as a human being or anything like that. I like your policy, but you're going to lose this for us, and your pride is in the way, or whatever it is. You need to step aside. And
100%.
I was angry about that. Now,
Mm-hmm.
Kamala, I've been so impressed with. I didn't know what to expect because she hasn't been as out in front as the VP.
That's right.
So I
Mm-hmm.
didn't know what to expect. And from what I was hearing from people on the right who I see on social media and who I talk to in real life, I thought, oh, this is not winnable either. In my mind, that was just me. So I was
Mm-hmm.
like, can we just have a chance to put up who we believe as a party might be the most winnable candidate against Trump?
Mm-hmm.
Now, I was dead wrong. She is strong. She is aggressive. She's raised, what is it, 30 million? Is that what I saw?
I think it's more than that now, I think. I mean, I know that the white dudes for Kamala Harris call raised $1 million in 4 minutes. And that tells you the rate of like fundraising that's happening.
Yeah, and he's scared, and Trump is scared to death.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, like, where's he been?
Because she's the vibrant young candidate now.
Yes, it's
Yeah.
incredible. So I've
Mm-hmm.
obviously pivoted. I still am okay with saying I didn't like the process because I didn't know how this would turn out, right? But the way it's turned out, I like, and I'm excited again. I'm energized again. That being said, I think her vice presidential pick is going to be important. And I know you posted something about that on Facebook. Do you have
I did.
a hunch of who it's going to be? And then the second question is, do you have a preference of who it's
I
going to
get the sense that it is going to be, well, I'll say this. I would love to see Buttigieg. It's not going to be him. I get the sense it's going to be Shapiro or Kelly. And I know a lot of people are pushing for Bashir. I could see that as well. I really like Shapiro because I think he's intelligent. I think he presents well. People have compared him, speaking wise, to Obama, which I think is great. And I think that he brings a lot of really attractive electoral votes with him. And so it's going to be somebody like that. I'm not opposed to, sorry for this term, but I'm not opposed to any agreeable white man that I know they're going to pull on this ticket, because that's probably how they perceive it as winnable. Would I love to see Gretchen Whitmer on the ticket? Yes, I would, Gabe. Absolutely. And that would be the most incredible America that ever existed, hands down. Try it. I don't think Americans are going to try it. This is very strategic. So yeah, I'm leaning Shapiro. I think Kelly would be a really fine choice as well. I'm less excited about him than Shapiro, though. What about you? Who are you interested in?
Yeah, well, I want to ask you this too, and I don't want this. Do you think Shapiro being Jewish would hurt a little bit?
I've more than one person has mentioned that. And I will say, I know that particularly for young voters, the Palestine issue is a big one that comes up over and over again. And it was one of the number one reasons why they said they did not want to put their support behind Biden. So I think that's a fair thing to say. If there's going to be one thing that keeps Shapiro from the top of the ticket, I think that's what it would be. But I just, in my mind, when I'm putting these very intelligent, very magnetic people together and thinking about how they would lead our country, I get very excited about it. So there's that. And I also, selfishly want to see Doug Emhoff as our, first gentleman of the United States of America. I think he's a delightful man. And then the thing we haven't really talked about too that gets me excited, I work with Gen Z and I love that generation. I think that they are just so cool and so engaged. I want to see them put their vote behind that engagement. This has done that. And another kind of funny place that I draw a lot of my inspiration from, I love TikTok, and Gen Z is on TikTok. And I can tell you that Kamala Harris has a phenomenal team behind her. There's another TikTok account, Kamala HQ, and you're seeing just the most incredible videos that are getting young people excited about voting for the first time in a long time, And so I think that we can't ignore that, because that's a big voting block. And I really hope that they show up in droves at the polls.
I've got a couple more questions, and one is related to TikTok, and then I will ask you the last.
Okay.
My daughter is 17. She has TikTok, and I ask her,
Mm-hmm.
when these big things happen, like the boxing event at the Olympics recently, or like these big cultural issues come to the forefront of social media, and misinformation is just like vomited out into the internet. I ask her, I'm like, what's TikTok saying about whatever? And I
Yeah.
get her perspective, and I'm like, whoa,
Mm-hmm.
that's incredibly wrong. Let's talk about
Exactly. Yeah. Fair.
so I haven't gotten on the TikTok train yet. One, I just not a preferred platform for me. But how
Mm-hmm.
much is that influencing, you think? And not just TikTok, right? Instagram Reels are the same thing. All of this social media that just throws out clips. How much of that is influencing like young people's thought, and even I'll even say older people's thought too, because even parents my age struggle to really understand what's real and what's not. I've seen elected officials here share satire pages as truth. So,
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's actually one of the things that I teach in my professional life. Just, having some media literacy and thinking about the source and where it's coming from. So it's like, I tell my students, if you want to think about what good journalism is saying about an issue, and then you can supplement that with some, funny, entertaining, advocacy videos that you might find in other places. But you need to know, like, what's the source? When was it published? What are their credentials? What are they trying to say? What's the purpose behind them creating this? Is it entertainment? Is it to inform? Is it to persuade? All those things that I think are really important. Just keep pushing for media literacy. So there are good and bad parts of TikTok Reels and any social media platform. And you're exactly right. Young people are no more susceptible than older people. I think the boomer generation is perhaps more susceptible to misinformation on social media, and they're voting in droves. So we might as well have a counter narrative in those platforms. And whether we like it or not, those kind of quick hit clips, they are very compelling to young people. And maybe we can't understand it, Maybe we've got a different perspective. Maybe we didn't grow up with the internet and cell phones, but they did. And so if we're, as a party, as Democratic Party, if we're not trying to reach them there, then we're really missing out on a key strategy, I think, in trying to capture that perspective.
So to bring this all full circle, I want to end with a question about the Democratic Party in general. And I'm going to tell you the way I see it. and then you can tell me if I'm completely wrong or if I'm a little bit right or
Okay.
if you agree as well. The Democratic Party umbrella in my mind, is huge, and
It
underneath
is.
there are all these different silos of groups, and sometimes those groups are directly at odds with each other. And here's an example of that. I think that the Democratic Party has generally been very friendly to minority groups, but I think in my experience, we're losing some of that. And I think that is directly sometimes at odds with the social stances and the support that the Democratic Party gives to the LGBTQ plus community. So there are these tensions within the party, and I know who would classify themselves as progressive liberals who are very much on board with one or both of these issues that these groups face, but they may not be on board with the other part of that. I don't
Hmm.
know if that makes sense what I'm saying or not. And I don't want to
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
stereotype these two groups because there are other divisions within the party as well, in my mind, like the things that people are very passionate about. You mentioned the young voters, like they might have a problem with Shapiro being on the ticket because he is Jewish. Like that's another piece of this that I hadn't even really thought of or hadn't been, I guess, affected by
Yeah.
necessarily.
Well, and I want to be very clear. I don't think that young voters, by and large, are anti-Semitic. So let's
Oh,
just
sure,
note
sure.
that. Yeah,
It's
I just
outside.
don't. You know,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. But the Palestine thing, it's important to them, and I think that that's definitely going to be considered by all of the smart people way above us who are going to decide the best, pick for Kamala Harris's campaign.
But I guess,
But
go ahead. I'm sorry.
so am I answering about big
No,
party? What am I answering?
yeah,
Yeah,
not bad. That was
because
terrible.
I agree. It is a big party, and we've seen that even locally. Like I said before, my husband and I used to be more active in the MCDP, the Madison County Democratic Party, and we would go to meetings and notice just how much of a divide there was in our different levels of where we landed liberally on the spectrum. So that some older Democrats, frankly, just seemed a whole lot more moderate to me. And I even jokingly sometimes referred to them as Republican light. But at the end of the day, I did feel like that we came together and that we had a greater sense of empathy and concern for the greater good. We wanted to, yeah, put forth some socialist ideas even to help people have attainable, happy, healthy lives. And I felt like that was where we were always united and where we still remain united. Even though we might disagree on some other little areas, I don't see those little disagreements or those places on the spectrum being enough to bust apart our big umbrella party, our big tent party.
Yeah, and I like it, and I like the fact there's space for a lot of different thoughts. As long as everybody can sort of come down, like you said, like what's the best thing for the human being, and that's what we've
Yeah.
lost sight of, I think, in a lot of this culture war conversation. And I keep saying we, I mean collectively as a society. I think people like us, like it's at the
Yeah.
forefront of our minds all the time. But collectively, I think we've lost that human element of what these bills actually do to human beings. Liz, thank you so much for joining me. Is there anything else? Is there anything we didn't get to that you want to get to, or that you want to say before we close out?
The big thing is just if anybody is, struggling with, voting, how to vote, need information about voting, they can certainly reach out to the MADWomen. We have a presence on Instagram, social media, madwomentfdw@gmail.com. They can be reached there. They can reach out to me personally on social media. We want to see people actively voting. And it may sound like I only want Democrats to get registered to vote, but the fact is I want an America where everybody feels empowered to get registered to vote and everybody feels excited about voting, and that when they do go to the polls, they believe that their vote matters and that it's not, that there's not somebody, some mechanism behind the scenes that's trying to stop the vote. And so that would be the number one thing I want to come out of this conversation today.
Thank you so much. I'd love to do another episode sometime down the road because I feel like there are a lot of things that we hinted at, but then we didn't have time to go down that road. So maybe we can do it again.
Absolutely.
Have a
Sounds
good.
good. Thank you, Gabe.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.